June 17th, and this is the Hermetic Hour. I'm your host, Poke Runyon, and tonight we're going to present a lecture on the 1770 Crata Repoa system of magical initiation. Now, I'm going to briefly describe this 18th century German and later French recreation of an ancient Alexandrian mystery tradition on a Masonic initiatory outline and model. Now, the Crata Repoa was a structural outline for a magical order that was 100 years older than both the O.T.O and the Golden Dawn Cypher Manuscript. We'll discuss the original authors, what they were trying to accomplish, and the considerable influence their creation had on subsequent magical traditions. Now, I'm going to recount how I literally stumbled into a French version of the system in 1963 and adapted it to the fledgling O.T.A in 1969. I'll carry the story on up into the 70s and the 80s and the 90s as we found out more about this system and we expanded our program along the lines laid out in the Crata Repoa. So, I have an article. We have our translation of the Crata Repoa directly from the German, which will appear in the 7th Ray coming up. That'll be the Green Ray, which we have, pretty close to going to the printers, but we'll have our 2005 translation directly from the German into English of the Crata Repoa in that issue, along with my commentary. And I have an introduction to it, which covers most of the points that we've brought up in this abstract. But I read it over before the show, and I realized that my introduction is too condensed, and it's too it's a bit of my anthropology showing. It's a little too scholarly to be understandable over the air, and I think that what I'm going to have to do here is I'm just going to kind of be just casual about this and try to discuss it in a manner that I think we can all understand it. What the Crata Repoa is a 7-degree outline. It's about half as long as the Golden Dawn Cypher Manuscript. It's only about 38 pages long. And it's an outline of what these German scholars back in the 1770s, early 1770s, that what they thought a mystery tradition initiation in Alexandria around the time of Christ, around that that period in Alexandria, the classical period, and this would be, of course, Greco-Egyptian, not necessarily ancient Egyptian, because actually in those days in Alexandria they had fused elements of ancient Egyptian with the Greek and with the Gnostic, and they had a very eclectic system in Alexandria. That's where our Hermetic tradition really got started, by the way. And so what the two German scholars, that was Karl Karl Koppen. He wasn't a von, and Johann von Heimann. Those two. They were both German Masonic scholars. Neither one seemed to have been in the Illuminati list, by the way, but they were astute scholars. Karl Koppen had 20 years earlier, before Crata Repoa, he had created a Masonic system called the African Builders, or the African Architects, and this was much more on a Masonic model than Crata Repoa. And then and his cohort on this, Johann von Heimann, had been a member of the Ruby Rose and Cross of Gold, that German Rosicrucian group that Kenneth Mackenzie who did the Golden Dawn Cypher Manuscript, came over some years, about 100 years later, actually. But so this was the background of these two Germans, and what they did was they took every reference they could find to classical Alexandrian type initiations that they could find in classical writings, and they put them all together, and they came up with this outline of what 7 degrees of a system leading all the way from the neophyte all the way up to the high adept, what this system really ought to be and what it ought to include. And this wasn't as detailed now as the Golden Dawn Cypher Manuscript. It really wasn't. It told you what you ought to do and what it ought to accomplish, but it didn't tell you exactly how to do it, which of course is great because it leaves a lot of creativity. It gives the magicians who want to use the system a great deal of creativity to create their own version of it, which is exactly, of course, what we did. Now, this system got published. I think the first one was around 1770, and then there were several different editions after that. The one that we're using for our translation is the 1778 one, which was put out by Christian Ludwig Stahlbaum, and that was in 1778. Nick Farrell, who are you listening, Nick? Anyway, your 1785 one is on the internet directly from the German by your friend Anita Horner, I believe. Ours was done by our German lady Ilse Bayek over here. And this Crata Repoa document, they circulated this in Masonic circles, limited, kind of a private circulation in Masonic circles, as a pamphlet, as a little pamphlet. And, of course, naturally, whenever you circulate something like that, even if you tell people to keep it confidential and all that, it's going to leak out. So, consequently, it got reprinted and it got circulated. However, it took it, as far as we know, it didn't get actually put into operation until, about 1821 in Lyon, France. The French attempted to do a version of it, and so it became rather obscure, and yet it did have a lot of influence. It had a lot of influence on the Martinists, and it crept into various Rosicrucian groups, and John Yarker, the British collector of various fringe Masonic degrees in the around the time of the Golden Dawn, that's the 1880s, Yarker published a English version of the French version of the German version. All right. Now, obviously, some errors crept into that, but he published it in a little pamphlet that he called them the Knauf. And we didn't know this, but Manly Hall had picked this up and published Yarker's English version of the French version of the German version in a book of his that came out in 1937 called Freemasonry of the Ancient Egyptians. It was a small publication, and I was not aware of it. Now, so this is the background of the Crata Repoa. Now, meanwhile, in between 1821 and around about, say, 1870 or so in France, a man by the name of Paul Christian, who happened to be a student of the great Eliphas Levi, decided that he was going to write a book on magic, a magnum opus, if you will, called The History and Practice of Magic. And he took the Crata Repoa, the Lyon version, and he kind of combined this with a little bit of Cagliostro's Egyptian Rite and a few ideas, I think, of Levy's and his own. And he came up with a 1-degree condensation of this whole thing, which he published in his History and Practice of Magic in about 1873, I believe. And he called this the initiation of the pyramids. Whoa, this was really a dramatic, exciting initiation. And to romanticize it even more, he attributed it to Iamblichus, the early Neoplatonic magical philosopher, Iamblichus. So, now here's how I got into this and how we backed our way into this thing. I had my near-death experience and my great epiphany, if you will, magical epiphany in 1969. I almost died, and in the process, I went kind of into a toxic psychosis before I lost about 50 pounds, and I was a walking skeleton, and I was on the way to dying, but I discovered the great secret of Solomon's magic in that state of whatever. And yet, before that, sure, I was kind of interested in magic, but not deeply interested in it. I had read the Saragossa manuscript, and I'd read some books on voodoo, and I was interested in Tibetan tantric Buddhism, so I'd read the Evans Wentz material. But I didn't know about all this. I didn't know about Crowley, and I didn't know about the O.T.O, and I didn't know about the Golden Dawn. I didn't know about any of that stuff. And so, when I got deathly ill, and by the way, in the case those of you listening don't know what happened, my mother, dear, bless her heart, fed me on bacon grease from the time I was a child. And she fed me on bacon grease, and because she would, our mammies taught us how to cook in the South. Our mammies taught us how to cook. So bacon grease, we fried everything in bacon grease. And here I grew up with this gallbladder that was doomed. And in fact, I told one of my black friends one time, I said, everything I am, I owe to soul food. And this thing was turned into a solid rock, and it was the size of my fist, and it was inside me, and it was inflamed, and I was jaundiced, and I was a walking skeleton, and I was getting weirder and weirder by the minute, and hypnotizing myself into deep levels, trying to suppress all this pain, which I thought was an ulcer, but misdiagnosed as not, it wasn't. And so I got that's how I got into the state where I read Cavendish's The Black Arts, which is a quick distillation of practical Western magic. Yeah, okay. So, and then I discovered I picked up something in Garrison's Tantra, the Yoga of Sex, this book, and he said that in the East, people stare in the dark mirrors and they see their previous incarnations. And in my crazy state and studying the Black Arts, I said, aha, that's how we can do Goetia. And sure enough, I tried it, and oh boy, did it work. So here I was, and I came out in operation, I survived. But I came out, and I regained my sanity and some of my weight and a little bit of muscle tone. Not enough muscle tone, though, because I eventually ended up with a naval hernia as a result of a 9th-degree operation. So, anyway, but anyway, here I had this great secret, and it really was a great secret because now we really could summon spirits to visible appearance. We could do it in the triangle. We could use exactly the same ritual that you got in the Lesser Key of Solomon, and we could actually make these spirits appear and talk to us. Now, this was amazing, and so I thought, after I recovered, I thought, well, gee, I guess this is what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to start a magical lodge, and I'm supposed to teach this, because that's a great secret, and oh boy, so here I am, and I'm thinking, okay, I don't know, except for Cavendish and the old Saragossa manuscript, and then that Paul Christian book that I'd read. I didn't know that much about magic, and yet here I had this terrific secret. I knew how to do it. So I thought, well, if I'm going to have a magical order, I better have some kind of a tradition. Well, so I bought Regardie's 2-volume 69 edition of the Golden Dawn, and I waded through it. And I thought, gosh, this is great information. This is terrific. I want to use all these correspondences. This is great. These guys have really got it. But these initiations are boring. Oh, God, no, I can't do this. And so, they're nice, but we'll use all their correspondences. That's fine. And then at that time, the O.T.O rituals weren't available, and I was just kind of getting into Crowley, and something about wanting to, going that way. What I was able to gather about it didn't seem to be the right thing, the right what we were looking for. Sure, their sex magic was great, so we took that. And the ninth degree was pretty much available, so we took that. But we still needed a tradition. We needed a tradition. Now, unlike some of these, the gurus of the 1970s, a lot of people, you don't remember how it was. A lot of you back in the 1970s, a lot of you too young to remember. It was a wild time. I mean, people were freaking out, and they would just about believe anything, and it was a totally different era than it is now. So, magic was just in the air. And some people were inventing stuff, just picking it out of nowhere, and didn't know what they were doing, and didn't care. And people were swallowing it because it sounded good. But I didn't want to do that. I wanted something that had some tradition to it. And yet I didn't know that much about Blavatsky, and I didn't know about Crowley, and I didn't know that. And I'd read the Golden Dawn, but I didn't want to get tied up with that. And the O.T.O was, well, I had some problems with that. But so I needed a tradition. And then I thought, Paul Christian. I know that Paul Christian book. Now, I had given that book to my girlfriend back in 1963. And she was born on Halloween, and she was an old soul, and she was quite a gal, and she wanted a book on magic. So I gave her this Paul Christian 2 volumes in a slipcase, history of practice. But I thought, well, if I'm going to give this to my girlfriend, I better read it first. I better find out what I'm giving her. So I did. I read it, and so consequently, here I am, 6-7 years later, thinking, what is my tradition going to be here? What am I going to tie this great secret that I have onto here? And I thought about Paul Christian's initiation into the pyramids. Now, I didn't know at the time anything about Crata Repoa, and I didn't know that Paul Christian's initiation in the pyramids was a condensation, along with some Cagliostro stuff and one thing or another, was a condensation of the 7 degrees of Crata Repoa. I didn't know that. But I did know that I really, really resonated to Paul Christian's initiation of the pyramids because it was exciting. It was dramatic. It was mysterious. It was really, it had the right feel to it. It really was a dramatic initiation. And I minored in drama in college, and I like to do Shakespeare and all this, and so I thought, this is what we need to do. So, our first O.T.A initiations in 1970 were based directly on that initiation into the pyramids. We didn't have a preliminary first degree like we do now. We just rolled it all up in that one big one, and we had a long probationary period, and then we hit them with this whopper of an initiation. And it still is. It still is one of the, I think, one of the best magical initiations that you can possibly go through. So that's how it got started. But then, after we did that, and we got rolling, and in the early 70s, then I discovered, and it was a sort of a backward route. And I went through Edward Waite's, he mentioned the Crata Repoa, and Idris Shaw had a chapter on it, and I began to realize that Paul Christian had taken his initiation of the pyramids from this Crata Repoa. So I got a hold of Manly Hall's book, and that Yarker version of it, and I thought, yeah, well, this is the way we're going to just grow. We'll just continue to expand the order based on Crata Repoa. So you guys, obviously that's where we got started to begin with anyway, backed our way into it, and so we did. Only, of course, I knew Manly Hall, but not that well. I'm not gonna say that I was studied at the feet of Manly Hall. I knew Manly Hall, and it got him to sign my copy of Freemasonry, the Ancient Egyptians, but that's what we decided to go ahead and continue building our initiatory structure on, Crata Repoa. So that's what we've done. Now, Crata Repoa, the original German, is a really, really remarkable little thing, and it gives you, as I said, it gives you a lot of room to be really creative. It tells you essentially what you need to do in this particular grade, and then it leaves it up to you pretty much to write the script and develop the symbolism and do what you need to do. Now, understand, of course, that Crata Repoa is Greco-Egyptian, so that means that you don't have to be tied into an ancient Egyptian pantheon. That's not necessary because these people were very eclectic. And, of course, I'm sure as everybody listening knows that we do ancient Canaanite seasonal ceremony, modern versions of ancient Canaanite seasonal ceremonies. And so we have to, have something that can accommodate our ancient Canaanite symbolism. And well, Crata Repoa does that very, very well, because it's an eclectic system. Now, just for instance, I'll just give you a sample of it. I'll read the first grade of Pastophorus, or the apprentice, who had to guard the doors to the entrance to the gate of men. And it says, as soon as the apprentice was prepared in the grotto, the Thesmophores, he's the guide, by the way, took him by the hand and led him to the gate of man. That's the entrance. Upon arrival, the Thesmophores tapped the older Pastophorus, who was posted outside to guard the door, on the shoulder, and the Pastophorus would then announce the apprentice. Now, by knocking at the door of the entrance, and after a few questions directed to the apprentice, the gate of man opened, and the newly initiated was admitted. And he was questioned by the hierophants on different issues, and his answer had to be precise. And my engineer's smiling at me. The answer had to be precise. Now, thereafter, the apprentice was shown around the Barantha. Now, the Barantha is their term for this labyrinth, this grotto. And during this time, artificial wind was created, rain fell on the initiated, lightning struck his face, and terrible thunder would upset his hearing. And now, when the apprentice could not be frightened by anything, the menes, or reader of the laws, would read to him the constitutions of Crata Repoa, which he had to accept. Now, once he'd subjugated himself completely to these constitutions, the Thesmophores led him before the hierophant, before whom he must throw himself down on his knees. The tip of a sword was placed against his throat, and the apprentice had to vow loyalty and secrecy. The sun, the moon, and the stars were invoked to witnesses of the truth. And after this oath, the apprentice's eyes were opened, and he was placed between the square columns called the Bateles, and those are the two pillars of Hermes. Between these two columns lay a ladder of 7 steps, with 8 doors of different measure. Now, these figures were not immediately explained to the apprentice, but the hierophant delivered the following speech. I turn to you who have the right to hear me. Close the doors first, so that the profane and the cynics cannot come in. But you, Menes Muse, or child of the work of celestial inquiry, hear my speech. I recite great truths Guard yourselves from prejudices and passions which would lead you away from the true road to bliss. Direct your thoughts upon the divine being, and let him be before your eyes constantly to guide your heart and mind. And if you want to walk the certain path to bliss, remember that you walk before the eyes of the Almighty who created the world, and it is the sole being which created and maintains all things, and that exists of itself, and he sees everything. And no mortal can see him, and nothing can be hidden from his view. And after this speech, they showed the apprentice the rungs of the ladder, and he had to cross in his ascent, and are symbolic of the transmigration of souls. And furthermore, they advised him that the names of God had completely different meaning than was known to the people. And they explained to him the causes of wind, lightning, and thunder, and in short, this grade was dedicated to the knowledge of nature. They also included anatomy and medicine, and they taught the symbolic language and common hieroglyphical writing. And directly after his acceptance, the Hierophant gave him the password, which all that were initiated recognized each other. The word was Amon, and it meant be discreet. And they also recognized each other by a special handshake. And then he received a sort of a cap. in the form of a pyramid, and they wrapped his hips with an apron called a xylon, and around his neck he wore a sort of a collar reaching down to his chest. And otherwise he walked unclothed, and it was his duty to guard the gate of men whenever it was his turn. Now, that's the outline of the first degree. So you can see here, comparing this to the Cypher Manuscript of the Golden Dawn, which, you know, we discussed that 2 weeks ago. Comparing it to the Cypher Manuscript, this is nowhere near as detailed, but it does tell you generally what you have to do. Now, in our publication, we got Tommy Westland's permission to reproduce this trestle board drawing that he has on his Sodalitas Rose Crucis et Solis Alati website. I really recommend you look at that. That's a Rosicrucian archive, and he has one of the trestle board drawings refers to Crata Repoa. It has a griffin and a wheel and 2 pillars, and it has this ladder or tower of gates. And it has very interesting Crata Repoa symbolism. And I asked Tommy if he'd let us reproduce that, and he said he would. I have a footnote on that ladder here that I'll read. It says, the ladder is derived from Mithriatic tradition and represents man's ascent up through the planetary spheres as his soul seeks to return to the celestial realm, the 8th sphere, or the O.T.A. Now, we represent this as the Caduceus of Hermes, a symbol of our Western chakra system. The 8 doors are the geometric figures that are the gates to the mystic spheres, or the Yetziratic chakras of the Tree of Life. And then I refer you to the Crata Repoa tracing board that we just discussed. Now, you should note that Hindu and Paul Foster Case alchemical chakras are etheric and do not follow this more ancient ascending Gnostic sequence, whereas our O.T.A. psychic center system does, and also Johann Gitchel's system does. We're going to discuss all that next week when we do a show on Hermetic Yoga. But this will give you an idea of what sort of thing the Crata Repoa does for you. So, Crata Repoa, of course, is public domain. We have no claim on it except to say that we've made it our tradition. But the beautiful thing about it is that if you really want to have a magical lodge and you're willing to take the challenge, you can do it yourself. I mean, we have no claim on it. You don't need a charter from me to do it. I mean, it's a wonderful, wonderful outline to build a really classical really traditional ceremonial magic tradition on. Now, one of the things that I like to discuss here is how the background of this got started with us back when we first got it started. During that era, things really were really wild and adventurous. Magic was in the air, and I wrote in the introduction here. I wrote that I said that I discovered I entered an older state of consciousness, nearly died, and rediscovered a lost secret of ancient sorcery that made me a mighty warlock overnight. Now, I said this may sound quaintly amusing in our cynical, dream-dead, info-saturated 21st century, but back in the psychedelic era, that was here in Southern California, such emerging urban legends were taken seriously, and by the instant gurus themselves and by a generation of turned-on college kids. Now, I had discovered a hypnotic method for conjuring spirits to visible appearance without drugs. That was the facial reflection distortion technique. It was so effective that I was now considered a master of magic by those, myself included, who were eager to believe in such things. And my sorceress exploits even inspired a low-budget movie called Simon, King of the Witches. Now, I got to qualify that by saying that the screenwriter, Epiphany, he says, or at least his director says, that he was the sorcerer that he based the screenplay on. But, I don't know whether that's true or not. I'm not trying to, I won't fight him over it, but doggone it, he's talking about all of us, and we never ran into him, so he must have been very, very quiet while he was watching us do all this stuff. But, I was a newcomer to the traditional occult tradition, and so that's why I really needed this venerable structure. Something I want to point out, too, while we're at it, that the mirror method, the reflection distortion mirror method, since we originally developed this, we've discovered from research that it's used in West Africa to bring forth the ancestors, and it's used in India to bring forth visions of previous incarnations. It's used by the Chinese and the Tibetans. This method is very, very powerful and very potent, and it really is the method that some of the magicians of the Goetia actually did use. Now, one thing that I want to point out about Crata Repoa is that Crata Repoa is a what you would call a Neoplatonic system. It's very hermetic. It's very Neoplatonic, and it incorporates the Mithriatic tradition, which is related to that too, and it fits perfectly with the further developments in the Western esoteric tradition. You can use Enochian if you choose to. You can use Enochian as the Ammonitish language that they refer to. A couple of things about that we found out when we did our translation. By the way, this is a technical note, Nick, if you're still listening. Our translation is off of a transcription made by Peter Trump in the Hermetic Museum in Amsterdam, off of Stahlbaum's 1778 version of Crata Repoa, and our translation is by Ilse Beck, and it's, it is complete. And so we had that in 2005. We're just finally getting around to publishing it. So be aware that we're not lifting yours from the internet. That's not where it came from. Anyway, the thing that Crata Repoa really does is it leads you through all of these degrees until you finally attain enlightenment. I'm going to go through the degrees, the degree system, and tell you a little bit about what each degree does, or should do, anyway. Now, the first degree we just read you, and that's the introduction to it. And then the second degree, which is now the one we do, by the way, we call it Neo-Chorus, is now the one we're doing. And the Neo-Chorus degree, in this one, let's see. The Pastophorus gave signs of his abilities during his year of apprenticeship. Severe fasting was imposed upon him, and this is, we don't do it quite that strenuously. And after completion of the fasting, the Neo-Chorus is brought into a black chamber called the Endemion. Delicious meals were served by beautiful women that refreshed his weakened strength. The women were slaves of the priests who, like the companions of Diana, visited him to lure him into love. Now, we got two, a painting from classical painting from engraving from Arthur Edward White's encyclopedia on this, and then we have Peter Trump, by the way, has an illustrated version in Dutch of the Crata Repoa. And we have one of these illustrations, which are marvelously stylized in there, of the women trying to seduce the candidate. Now, once he passed his trial, the Thesmophorus came to him again and asked him questions, and after that, the Neo-Chorus answered them correctly. And he was led to the assembly, and the Stolista, or water carrier, poured water over him. And he then had to affirm that he had lived in a chastity and modesty. And when this was done, the Thesmophorus came running towards him with a living serpent and threw it at his body and pulled it out again from underneath his apron. Oh, boy. And the place of meeting was also filled with snakes to frighten the Neo-Chorus. Remember Indiana Jones? Why does it have to be snakes? And again, he was led to the two high columns in the middle of a circle, and it was seen to be pushed again. He was led to two high columns in the middle of a circle that were seen to be pushed as a wheel before it. Now, this is actually a griffin, and you'll see that in the trestle board. It was explained to him that the columns represented east and west, orient and occident. The circle, the griffin, symbolized the sun, and the wheel of the four spokes symbolized the four seasons. But now he was taught the art of maintaining water levels, and he was instructed in geometry and architecture and learned to deal with all the standards and measures and methods of calculation. Well, today we make the candidate learn the tree of life and all the correspondences that go to it. As his insignia, received a staff encircled by a snake, and the word was Heve, and that was the password, and he was told about the fall of the human race, and his sign was to cross his arms on his chest, and his duty was to wash the columns. And you can see how this progresses. Now, I'll skip over a little bit here, and I want to get to a couple of things here that I want to discuss. The degree of Balahate, that's the fifth degree, and that's in our inner order system. Balahate, the Chistophorus had the right. The Chistophorus is the preceding degree. That's like a Rosicrucian degree. The Chistophorus had the right to demand this grade, and the Demiurgos, who was the master, the Grand Master, could not refuse it. And so he was led to the place of assembly where he was received by all the members who brought into the hall. And next, a sort of stage play happened in which he could observe, and for which he received an explanation at the end. The person called the Orus, accompanied by several Balahate carrying torches, walked around the hall as if looking for something. At length, the Orus drew his sword. A cavern became visible, and from which flames shot up, and the sad murderer Typhon was there. Horus approached. Typhon stood up, showed himself in his horrible form, 100 heads seated on his shoulders, his whole body covered with scales, and his arms of surprising length. Despite all this, the Orus advanced toward him, threw him down, defeated him, cut his head off, threw his body in the cavern from which horrible flames burst forth. The head was shown to everyone, and not a word was spoken. Now the new Balahate received the instruction that Typhon represents fire, one of the most terrible elements without which nothing could be accomplished in the world. The Horus, the labor, and the diligence could benefit greatly from it if they knew how to control its power at the same time. Now the Balahate was shown the instructions to chemistry, and as far as he felt inclined, he was at liberty to observe their research as often as he liked, and for this purpose the password was Tamiya. Now, I have a footnote on this one. I said there are no original footnotes on this degree either in Yarker's rendition or in the original German. Now, to see how much we've deviated from the outline here. In our version of Balahate, we dramatize the legend of King Solomon, Adoniram, and the Queen of Sheba. That's an alternate version of the Masonic third-degree legend. The Queen of Sheba was the mystic muse of medieval alchemists, and the casting of the Brazen Sea invokes the subterranean master alchemist Tubal-Cain, and of course this is where the fire comes in. And we also instruct the candidate the deepest mysteries of plant alchemy. Now, the reference to this is Gerard de Nerval's turned into the Orient. So you see, we're really moving away from the outline there, but we're covering essentially the same stuff. And now the next one here, and this is one that I really need to emphasize and make a correction in the original Crata Repoa. It's called 6th Grade Astronomus Before the Gates of the Gods. Now this grade requires some preparation, and when he entered the assembly hall, he was put in irons. The Thesmophorus led him back to the gate of death, which had many steps one had to climb down, because when initiated into the third grade, the cave was filled with water. Of course, we have an ideal setup for that. Here he saw corpses lying about that had been put to death as traitors to the society, and he was threatened with the same destiny, and then led back in to take a new oath. And after taking the oath, the origin of the whole dogma of the gods was told, and the instructions in practical astronomy were given. At night, he had to be present at their observations and help them work. Now, he was warned about astrology and horoscopes, for they hated and loathed them as the cause of all idolatry and superstition. These false teachers of the people had chosen the word phoenix as their password, at which the astronomers just sneered. Now, right after his acceptance, he was led to the gate of the gods, and it was opened, and then he found them in form of paintings, whereby the demiurgos, all interpretation of history, shared without concealing anything. Now, this is the original Eliphas Levi, Paul Christian version of the tarot, which they attributed to Iamblichus. They also showed him the line of their prior high guards, chief observers, and the list of their members scattered around the world. They also taught him a priestly dance, which represented the orbit of the heavenly bodies and its movements. And the password was Ibis, which meant the crane and symbolized vigilance. Now, this is a very strange situation with this, the way this degree is described. For one thing, this anti-astrological passage up here is an extreme version of German rationalism, Enlightenment rationalism, and it almost sounds like it was written by Adam Weishaupt, but it certainly could not have been written by Johann von Hyman. He, as a member of the Ruby Rose and Cross Gold, he never would have written it. They must have argued about this one. This is something that I think is entirely the responsibility of Karl Koppen, and what happened in order to justify, because this is ridiculous, because there was no difference between astronomy and astrology in Ptolemy's day, and Ptolemaic Hori astrology is the basis of magic. It's the groundwork of magic. So this is something that we can attribute to, as I said, it's an infection of Enlightenment rationalism that got inserted into here, and what made this worse was when Yarker did his translation. He attributed this passage, the footnote on this passage, the backup on this was attributed to Herodotus. And Herodotus, of course, is an authority, and Herodotus is from 500 BC. And oh boy, if Herodotus had said this, this would carry some weight. But as it turns out, once we get the translation from the German, actually it's Heliodorus. Now, this is an entirely different situation, because Heliodorus was not an authority at all. Heliodorus, this is a 4th century AD novel called Ethiopica. And it's more of a poetic novel than a history. And so it has, their authority that they're citing here is not an authority at all. So this thing really, as far as we're concerned, we disregard this entirely. But this is one of these things that shows some of the political aspects that we're entering into this at the time. Neither one, by the way, that anybody knows, neither Karl Koppen or Johann von Hyman were not Illuminati as far as we know. And we know almost everybody, that prominent people and Masons that were Illuminati are on record, so they're not. But still, that's that particular thing. As far as we're concerned, we've really disregarded that. Now, the end result of all of this, of course, is the enlightenment of the Hermetic tradition, and which essentially is the great I am, the idea that as above, so below, you are the microcosm, and there is only one great creative force in the universe. And so it leads you in that direction. Now, let me read you the last degree, and we'll give you some idea how that goes. This is called, 7th grade is called the prophet, or rather the Tanakh, the man who knows the mysteries. The last and most superior grade, in which all mysteries were explained in detail. The astronomer could not achieve this grade without permission and consent of the king, the demiurgos, and all the higher members. The acceptance was followed by a public procession, whereby they showed him the public sacred objects. The procession was called the Pamalak, and after the procession,
They secretly left the city at night, going to where certain houses were that were built as squares and had various chambers. Now, all of them were magnificently painted with allegories of human life. Here again, we're referring to this magical symbolic tarot. Now, the houses were called maneras because the common people believed that they were on visiting terms with the manes. When they arrived at these houses, which were surrounded by many columns, by which alternately stood a sphinx and a coffin. This is a necropolis, by the way. Necropolis symbolism. The new prophet was presented with a drink, a potion, called O.T.A. And he was told that all the tests had come to an end. Now, O.T.A, that's, with us, that's 50% honey and 50%, 151% rum. And as those of you who are familiar with our seasonal ceremonies and our communions and all, that's you want to go kind of easy on that. And when we set fire to it, don't burn your lip when you take the Grail cup. Okay. Then he received a cross of special significance, which he had to wear at all times. He received a beautiful, wide, white striped robe called the O.T.A, and his sign was mainly that he would usually cross his arms with his hands within the sleeves. His head was then shaved. I haven't decided to shave my head yet. He then received permission to read all the sacred books, which were written in the Ammonic language, for which they gave him the code called the Royal Building Beam. Now, this is really, really interesting. Well, at least it's interesting to you magic buffs. Now, this is something here again that Yarker, when he went into his English version of the French version of the German version, he managed to leave this out because this cipher, this is a pig pen cipher, like a Masonic cipher, but it works for ancient Greek. And once you realize this, this ties into the Kabbalah of Nine Chambers and the original Greek version of the Kabbalah of Nine Chambers. It ties into our Soma Sophia of Marcus. It is profoundly interesting, and it isn't just a little variation of Pigpen cipher. It's the vast and deep origin of Pigpen cipher. It makes Pigpen cipher a great deal more important than it ever was before. And Yarker left it out. Why did he leave it out? Well, because he wanted to use it in his own condensation of Crata Repoa. He did like Paul Christian did. He squeezed Crata Repoa all together and put it into his own rite of Memphis and Mizraim and called it the 64th degree, the Sage of Mithras. So he could have a royal beam cipher in there. So anyway, so we got that back. So we stole it back from the rite of Memphis and Mizraim. So it was originally a Crata Repoa secret. So anyway, then they finished off with they have a meal, sacred meal, and that then a description of the various duties, the meals, the positions, and the positions in attire, and this is unfortunately this is the last page that Nick Farrell's version doesn't have, but you can find it on the Rosicrucian website. If you go to let's see, Sodalitas, Rose, and Crucis, and that's an asterisk. Solis Paolati. Go to that, and you'll find it. Now, this has been a kind of a complex, but I think in doing this sort of off the cuff and folksy style here. I think maybe I've been able to get it across better than a scholarly version of it. I read over this. I read over my paper, and I thought, oh my gosh, I can't do this. But this Crata Repoa system is just really nice and deep, and I wish Peter Trump would get a English version of his Dutch version of the Crata Repoa out. His Dutch version is marvelous, especially with his artwork. So, Peter, if you're listening, we really appreciate your Dutch version of the Crata Repoa, and the artwork that he has in there is absolutely, it's just charming. It's symbolic artwork. I've got a few reproductions that Peter let me do, and I'll have that out in the 7th ray. We got somebody setting off a bunch of firecrackers around here. I don't know whether you hear them in the background. But anyway, how we doing on time? Yeah, 3 minutes left. Okay, next week we're going to get into that ladder that we're talking about here in the Crata Repoa that goes up. We're going to get into Hermetic Yoga, and I'm going to try to make that one as easy to understand. Oh boy, somebody just set off a big rocket. I'm going to try to make that as understandable as I hope I've made the Crata Repoa talk. And I encourage you to go take a look at what Dick has up there, in his website. Read it over, and look at Manly Hall's book, and anybody out there that wants to create a magical order based on Crata Repoa, boy, we'll not only will we encourage you, but we'll help you along. I want to see more and more people get interested in this. And so anyway, I think that concludes our broadcast for this evening. We'll look forward to seeing you next week, or hearing you, being with you next week. And let us have some feedback. We really appreciate your listening to us, and hope you'll invite us into your home again. And so, good magic, and good night for this evening. Bye-bye.